It's a difficult time right now as we enter the last couple hours of the fast. I appreciate everybody staying for another shiur, and I understand it's not easy. But I'd like to offer a few words that I think give some perspective on a very unique Jewish tragedy, and that's the tragedy of the Shoah, of the Holocaust. And we understand that after the Holocaust, there's a question, do we create a new Yontiv? Or is it just a continuation of Tisha B'Av? And the rabbis of the time, the Brisker Rav and others, felt just like after the Crusades, we didn't create a new day of remembrance. We just went on, and Tisha B'Av what it is. So that speaks to the Holocaust as well. The Holocaust is the way in which we focus on it is by Tisha B'Av. And the reason why particularly is because any Jewish tragedy that happens is really a continuation of the Galus, is a continuation of the exile. And in order to get some perspective on the Holocaust and something unique that I'd like to share with us in a moment, I think first we have to understand the exile that we're in. The exile that we're in right now is called the Roman exile. It's the last of the 4 exiles, and it's the longest. The first exile, the exile of the Babylonians, was 70 years, followed by the Persians. After 70 years, we came back and we were able to rebuild a base of Mikdash. The Romans came in, and for the last 2,000 years, we've been in exile. We can't seem to undo the problem that was caused, that led to the destruction of the Second Temple. What was the problem? The problem was a disease, our sages say, that we were affected by or infected by the Romans. It was a spiritual disease. It was a disease of something called competition. A disease whereby you look at somebody else and you don't see a continuation of another Tselem Elokim. You don't see a divine image, you see an enemy. You could look at your own brother, and what do you see? You see an enemy. And we call that in Hebrew, we call it sinat chinam. Hating somebody else just for who they are. And apparently this disease is a disease which is so difficult to uproot that 2,000 years has not yet been enough. The first temple, it was avodah zarah, idol worship. We realized our mistake, we fixed it up. There was murder involved. We realized the mistake, we fixed it up. There was immorality, we fixed it up. But when the problem is us, when the problem is in our hearts, this is something which is so difficult. How do we uproot from our hearts this idea of sinas chinam? And that's why our sages say something very fascinating in the Talmud and Yuma. Our sages say, better the claws of the first temple than the bowels of the second temple. What does that mean? It means like this. We know when you look at a kosher animal, an animal to be kosher has to have 2 signs. It has to have a split hoof, meaning it can't have claws. It can't be a predator, it can't grab, it can't tear. And it has to chew its own cud, meaning it has more than one stomach. That's the spiritual idea of being samech b'chelcho, happy with what it has. And therefore, for us to ingest an animal, it has to have those 2 qualities. It can't be something which preys on others, and it has to be satisfied with what it has. It says that each of the different golios, the exiles, compared to one of the non-kosher animals. It says the Roman exile is compared to the chazir, the pig. The pig is the only animal that's not kosher. As the Torah says, the only one in creation, which says, look at me on the outside, I'm kosher. I have a split hoof. But when you go to the inside of the pig, what do you see? You see it's totally not kosher. The pig therefore represents the idea of hypocrisy. It represents the idea of, I'm pretending to be something that I'm not. That's the idea of the chazir, and that's what our sages meant. We'd prefer to have an animal with claws. What does that mean? At least it shows me on the outside what it is. But the pig says, I look so refined. I look just like you. I'm so kosher. But when you get inside of it, you realize there's such defections. And that's the problem of our generation. That's the Roman exile. It's this idea that things can look good on the outside, but the heart is so wrong. And for 2,000 years, we seem to have not been able to shake that off. You know, it says that the sin that brought about the destruction of the Second Temple was the story of two men called Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. I'm sure many are familiar with the story, but just briefly, there's a party. And who's invited? We meant to invite Kamsa. He invites Bar Kamsa. And the host looks at the guy and says, "What are you doing here?" And he asks him to leave. And Bar Kamsa says, "Listen, I'll pay for what I eat." He says, "No." He says, "I'll pay for the entire party." He says, "No." He picks him out and throws him out. The question that the morale asks is, why do we have to know the details of that negotiation? Just say he threw him out. Why do we have to know that first he said, "I'll pay for what I eat"? Then he said, "I'll pay for the whole party"? He says, because we have to understand the hatred for Bar Kamsa, it wasn't about money. It wasn't about something that can be satisfied by just payment. It was about, I hate you just because you are who you are. I don't see you as part of me. I see you as my enemy. That's sinas chinam. And that's why the negotiations are so important. Now, we've maintained this disease for the last 2,000 years. I heard something the other night, I'd like to quote Rabbi Gladstein on it. He said something very interesting. Today we can't say shalom to each other. No she'elat shalom. And it's a very difficult thing to do. We see each other, and we so much want to greet each other, and we kind of have to look down. And even if somebody says to you, "Shalom, how are you?" you're supposed to just give a little mumble back and just say, you know, not be overly friendly, encourage the person. They shouldn't be greeting you. So the question is, why are we doing that? On the day when we're working on sinas chinam, on the day when we're working on rectifying the hatred of our heart, shouldn't we be going from door to door and greeting each other and saying shalom? It's a beautiful answer I heard expressed, was the idea that today is a day when we want to be totally real with ourselves. How often do we say shalom to each other? Good morning, how are you? And in our hearts we're thinking something else. Thinking, I don't really like you. I don't want to speak with you. I have a grudge against you. Today we're real. Today we're going to say no phoniness. Stop looking like something on the outside if that's not who you are on the inside. Don't be the chazir today. Today's not the day we're going to be the animal, the pig that represents the Roman exile. My friends, I'd like to fast forward with you in Jewish history. And I have to understand that when Hashem brings any tsaros, any pain, a continuation of the exile, however it's expressed, it's designed to help us fix up the problem that we possess. That's the purpose of Golus. That's the purpose of exile. The darkness that we have is here in order for us to break through it and discover who we really are. Our deeper sources say that the side of the Satan, the side that is there to create darkness, so to speak, in order for us to rise and break through it and discover what we can really be, and to break out of any type of bad personality traits or bad habits. The side of the Satan is called the Samkel. Samik Mem Aleph Lamed. It's interesting. If you look at a simple gematria, and I'll just say this gematria not because I'm an expert in any way in numerology, but just because I think it corroborates very beautifully the point that I want to make. The Samkel, Samik Mem Aleph Lamed. If you take the Samik, the Mem, the Aleph, and the Lamed, you add it together, it's 131. 131 happens to be the numerical value of one of the greatest enemies of the 20th century against the Jewish people, Eichmann. Aleph Yud Yud Chaf Mem Nun is 131. Eichmann was the one who orchestrated the final solution, the one who the Israelis eventually caught in 1961 and executed in 1963. Eichmann, the Samkel, the Satan's way of challenging us. And how interesting it is, if you take the words of the Samel, the Samkel, and you write out the letters, Samech Mem Chaf, Mem Mem, Aleph Lamed Pei, Lamed Mem Dalet. Of course, if you take the first letters, you have the 131. But how interesting it is, if you take the remaining letters, it's numerically 254. Again, if you take the Mem Chof of Samech, the Mem of the Mem of the Mem, the Lamed Pei of the Aleph, and the Mem Dalet of the Lamed, it's 254. 254 is an interesting number. Why? Because it's the same numerical value of these letters. Hey, Yud, Tet, Lamed, Resh, which is Hitler. So Rabbi Glaserson points out in his Sefer, the outer letters of the Sot and the Samkel is Eichmann, the one who externally brought about the final solution. The inner letters, those letters, the inner letters, what do you see? You see the numerical value of Hitler. I think the message is very significant. In the test of the Holocaust, what do we discover? We discover the Samkel, we discover Hashem's angel there who's trying to test us. And how interesting it is, if you add those numbers together, the 254 of the inner letters and 131 of the outer letters, it comes to 385. 385 is the same numerical value as the Shekhinah, Hashem's loving presence. I would suggest the test of the Holocaust, the test of the Shoah, was a continuation of the Roman exile, a continuation of Hashem's need and desire that the Jew should discover and rid himself of this Roman affliction, which is, my heart is not pure. To rid ourselves of being something on the outside and being false on the inside. I think to understand this, I'd like to share with everybody a piece from one of the great rabbis, Rabbi Dessler. And Rabbi Dessler says in his Miktav Eliyahu, he asks a question. His question is about his own yeshiva in Kelm. In 1941, the Germans came into Kelm, and they took the entire yeshiva, and they brought them out to a field. They had the yeshiva dig their own graves, and then machine guns were lined up in order to execute the entire yeshiva. The Rosh Yeshiva of Chelm was someone named Rav Daniel Moshevitz. Rav Daniel Moshevitz was a great Talmid Chacham and a great tzaddik. He went to the German in charge, and he turned to the German, and he said, "We need a few minutes." The German said, "You can take a few minutes." He went back to his yeshiva, and he said to his boys, "You have to understand right now, we're dying for Kiddush Hashem. We're going to sanctify God's name. I'd like everybody to clear the mind from any distracting thought. If we're going to be a true korban, there can't be any blemish." He then walked back to the German officer in charge, and he said, "We're ready now. You can proceed." And the Germans executed, killed in cold blood the entire yeshiva. A magnificent display of self-control, a magnificent display of what a human being is capable of achieving at the most critical point in his life. Something when I think about, I take tremendous pride in being a member of a nation that's capable of having such people. Rav Dessler raises a question when he talks about his yeshiva, when he talks about Chelm. And his question is as follows. He says, "I don't understand. In Jewish history, we've never seen a case like this. In Jewish history, there's always been a choice. For example, if we go back to the Crusades, it's a choice. The choice was accept Christianity or be killed. And so many Jews refused, of course, and died. If we go back to the Spanish Inquisition, 1492, many Jews were given that choice as well. The choice, are you going to accept conversion or death? And Jews accepted death. Kiddush Hashem has always been in Jewish history a function of a choice. Sanctifying God's name. Given a choice, what am I going to do? And Rav Dessler raises the question, he says, I don't understand it. When it comes to the Holocaust, when it comes to the Shoah, in most cases, there was no choice. They brought our brothers and sisters out to fields and shot them. Or they took us to concentration camps and brought us almost many millions straight to the gas chambers. Where was the choice? If there's no choice, how can there be Kiddush Hashem? What is one doing where one has the opportunity to sanctify God's name? So certainly we can say that Kiddush Hashem is a function of dying because we're a Jew. We represent the Almighty, and when the Rishoyim of the world wage war on us, on our bodies and our Torah, they're waging war against Hashem. So certainly just dying because one is a Jew, there's no question that that's Kiddush Hashem. And there's no question that every Israeli soldier who dies in the defense of Klal Yisrael is dying as Kiddush Hashem. We should see the end of that. But perhaps there's something more. Rav Dessler suggests that perhaps in the way a Jew dies, there can be Kiddush Hashem. Because what happens at the time of death? What happens at the time of death is a person has to make a decision. The decision is, what do I believe? Do I understand that the Almighty is good? Do I understand that there's a hashgacha here that I don't understand? Do I understand that there's an olam haba that I can look forward to and I can expect? There's a test that a person is put to in that situation where one has to define themselves at their core. Who am I and what am I? What is in my heart? Am I real with myself? Do I really believe? Or have I been putting on an act? Have I been putting on a show? That's the question a person has to face. And it's that question, Rav Dessler says, which is mevarer, which clarifies the heart and perfects the heart. And I would suggest that in the exile that we're in right now, the exile of Rome, the exile of the pig, the chazir, in exile where there's falseness on the outside, and we've created that falseness on the inside as well. We can't love each other. We have sinas chinam. We don't appreciate another. Where the problem is the heart. Perhaps the Ribono Shel Olam gave us a Shoah, gave us a situation, a test like no other test in human history, where for millions of Jews, the test was only, what's in your heart? What are you going to feel and think and believe at this moment? And by doing so, I would suggest that the Shoah was a means by which Hashem uplifted his nation, which he brought us to the clarity of who and what we really, really are. You know, the test of the heart is a test that we're constantly working on. Dramatically, sometimes we feel it in a Shoah, where there's no place to run, there's no choice. And that's what Rav Dessler says so powerfully. This is like no test in history. We're not given a choice. No one's saying bow down or don't bow down. No one's saying believe or don't believe. The only test is, what do you believe? When the only question now is, how are you going to die? That's a very drastic test. And I would suggest that so many millions passed it. But we have that test now also. The test is, how do we work on our hearts to perfect them and to purify our hearts? And what do I mean by that? The heart is so deep. Our midos are so inside of ourselves. Yet I do believe there's a way. I think it's incumbent upon us to, number one, just make a little bit of effort to look at another Jew and understand we know so little about that person. If we knew that person's tests, nisyonos, problems, we would certainly judge and think much favorably. And perhaps we could use a device that my Rosh Yeshiva, Venak Leibovitz, used to say. He used to say, in the mitzvah of not taking revenge, lo sikom lo sitor, don't take revenge. It's so difficult sometimes when someone harms us. We just so badly want to get back. So he used to say, imagine the following. Imagine in your heart you want to take revenge, or you want to hold a grudge, and all of a sudden you get a phone call, and you're told, guess what? You're now $1 billion richer than the moment before. You won the lottery. He said that person that you were so angry with, that person would be the person you're now dancing with. Because why? The small thing in your life doesn't compare with the greatness of that which you just experienced. And he used to say, if we could focus on the fact that the creator of all reality, the Rabbanu Shalom, if we could focus on the truth that Hashem loves us so much, and his love for each and every one of us, every human being, and how much more so every member of Klal Yisrael, if we could imagine how much he loves us, $1 billion pales in comparison to the wealth that we all possess. So why sweat the small stuff? Why look at things which really are meaningless when the goodness so outweighs? My friends, this should be the last Tisha B'Av. It should be a time of the Bias Mashiach. We're told by Chazal that the fourth Golus of Edom is the last Golus. This is it, this is the end. But we have one thing left to do. We have to get inside of our own hearts, our own selves, and find a little bit more way to perfect it. And Bezrat Hashem, in the schus of today's Tisha B'Av, in the schus of all the work that so many here do and the care that so many people have for Klal Yisrael, it should be the end of Tisha B'Av, the last Tisha B'Av, and begin Mashiach B'Yav Yameinu. Amen. Amen.